Sup guys, this is another video in the Understanding Equipment series. I don't know if that's going to be the official name yet, but that's what I'll call it for now. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to determine the armor type of the enemy you're going against. This is the most important information you need to know in order to be able to choose the right equipment for the job. Choosing a weapon without knowing the armor type you're up against is like choosing between a spoon and chopsticks without knowing if you're having cereal or noodles. I'll be using the wiki a lot, and I encourage you to do the same if you're interested in learning more about the game. Although it doesn't cover literally everything there is to know, it is a great resource nonetheless. Before I begin though, I want to address a few misconceptions from the Best in Slot video I released yesterday. First, there were comments saying that BIS stands for Best in Scenario. Unfortunately, nobody uses it that way, and redefining terms to whatever you want will lead to confusion. Imagine a new player coming from other games where Best in Slot equipment actually exist, and they ask you for a Best in Slot recommendation. You process it as Best in Scenario, and give them a recommendation which only works for one specific scenario. Odds are they're going to end up using that equipment for everything, because nobody thinks of BIS as Best in Scenario, so let's just stick to definitions that the majority of people are familiar with. Next, there were some comments saying that the Best in Slot exists, but it varies based on the situation. For example, there is a Best in Slot AP gun for when you're fighting against a medium armor enemy, and a Best in Slot HE gun when you're fighting against a light armor enemy. That in itself is a contradiction with the term Best in Slot, since you have to swap the weapon depending on the situation. If a weapon is the best for that slot, there would be no reason to ever switch it with another. I'll give two examples of actual Best in Slot equipment in Azur lane, which do, very rarely, exist. First is the Plymouth gun from PR5. It's the Best in Slot gun for essentially every light cruiser gun slot because there's just no competition for it at the moment. Some people may think that it is not the best because its DPS on paper seems to be lower than some HE light cruiser guns, especially against light armor, but I'll explain why it still is when I cover light cruiser guns. Another example of Best in Slot equipment is the 76mm on ships like Shimakaze and Kawakaze. Their main gun damage is almost non-existent and only exists to proc their barrages. The 76mm, being the fastest gun available, is always used on them. Now that I've shown you a couple examples of Best in Slot equipment, I hope you have gotten a better understanding of why other equipment are not Best in Slot. Okay, now, back to armor types. There are some basic rules that work at least 95% of the time, and some external resources, and a method for when all else fails. Starting with the rules, we can determine a lot just from the hull class of the enemy. I made a table here showing which hull classes fall into which armor types. Feel free to screenshot it and save it if you want. I'm 99.9% sure that this is correct, but on the off chance that I made a mistake and someone points it out, I will make the necessary correction and add a pinned comment under the video with the correct version. This table applies for all of our ships, and the enemy versions of them will have the same armor type like 99.999% of the time. For example, if you're against a Congo enemy, the Congo that we have is medium armor, so the enemy will have medium armor as well. If you're against a Taiho enemy, one of the rare carriers with heavy armor, it will be heavy armor as well. For production type enemies, which are the ones that look like ships and not sprites of ship girls, most of them follow the common armor types. One notable exception is the command ships that start popping up in chapters 13 and onward, which are listed as carriers with heavy armor. If you want to find out which ships belong to the uncommon and rare category, you can go to the list of ships by stats page on the wiki and sort by the armor type column. For example, we can see here that Aurora and Pamiat are light cruisers with medium armor, and the Illustrious class and Taiho are carriers with heavy armor, and so on. For Operation Siren, all Siren enemies follow the common rule, with the exception of the add that the light cruiser Arbiter summons. Even though the Arbiter itself is a light cruiser with light armor, the add actually has medium armor. Otherwise, they all follow the rules. Here is another version of the table in the opposite orientation, so use the one you prefer. I recommend that you learn the abbreviations for the whole classes as well as their icons, which you can find in-game if you go into the Fleet Tech page and click on Addition Details. You will only be able to see the whole icon on enemies in battle, not the names of the whole classes, so this is very helpful. Aside from the rules and the wiki, here is a resource that shows information of every node in all of the campaign stages, which include the armor types of every single enemy. I will link it in the description as well as all the relevant wiki pages from this video. If all else fails, you can find the armor type of the enemy by testing different ammo on them. Here's a quick demonstration. Let's pretend that I don't know what armor type Takao has, the one from this month's challenge mode. You can do this with any weapon type, but battleship guns deal a lot of damage, have greatly differing ammo mods, and are overall just the easiest to differentiate. I am using John Bart to save time as she has a preload with no barrages. First, I will hit it with 406 MK6, which has HE ammo. On the first salvo, it dealt 7,686 damage without crit, and 2,444 damage on the second. Next, I will switch to the 406 MLE, aka the Champagne Gun, which has AP ammo with similar base damage. The first salvo dealt 10,071 damage without crit, and the second one dealt 3,206 damage. Since MK6's ammo has higher modifiers against light and lower against medium and heavy compared to the Champagne Gun, we know that Takao is definitely not light armor. Being a heavy cruiser, she cannot be heavy armor either, but let's just test it regardless. Finally, I hit it with the Italian 406, an SAP gun, which deals a third as much damage against heavy armor when compared to medium. As you can see, since it's dealing more damage than the AP gun I used previously, we can conclude that the Takao is indeed medium armor and not heavy. This is in most cases going to be unnecessary and probably only worth doing if you suspect that an enemy isn't following the rules and nobody has data mined it yet. And don't forget, you can always join a public Discord server and ask more experienced players what the armor type of a particular enemy is. They will most likely give you the correct answer. And that's pretty much it. Hopefully, by this point, you have understood how to determine the armor type of the enemy you're facing, one way or another, and from this point onward, I will start going over equipment with the assumption that you know what armor types are. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.